Well, there'll be a few people waking up this morning with their flesh already crawling, and that really will be, won't it? Jonathan Samuels earning his Christmas bonus with that story. He looked really quite peaky, didn't he? Having a look at the papers this morning, the broadcaster David Akinsanya and the journalist Nabila Ramdani. Welcome to both of you, and a Happy New Year too. David, you're going to kick us off, aren't you, with Rowan Williams?
Yes, today at 12:45 we're going to hear from Rowan Williams. We've already seen reports on Sky, but basically he's referring to the riots and what he's doing. He's saying that you know, it's important that we understand that it was only a minority of young people out on the streets who were doing this, and that actually, as adults, we need to be a bit more involved with young people. Obviously, some of his comments today are going to upset the government. I mean, I think David Cameron has already had a go.
He's been criticised for understanding too much and criticising too little.
That's right. So, I mean, we'll have to see what he has to say. I know he did some filming at Kids Company, which is in South London. But you know, he's saying that the problem is heartbreaking. And another thing that I always think about this is that we don't talk about, you know, some of these young people. We know that there are a lot of inadequate parents out there. We know there are a lot of young people. I had a young boy mentee ring me on the night of the riot saying, should I go? Now, you know, if young people haven't got the right people to be able to ask, then, you know, it's going to cause us a lot of problems.
Strongly recommend David Lammy's excellent book, which I'm currently reading about the riots. Absolutely fantastic. Nabila, your breast implant story.
Yes, a very important story on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, which reveals the true scale of breast implant scandal. The paper says that rupture rates may be 7 times higher than admitted, which prompted the Andrew Lansley, the health secretary, last night to order a review on the faulty breast implants, which concerns 40,000 women in the UK. And I think that's a hugely important story because now we have the government doing some fact checking on the statistics of the, you know, on the faulty implants. I think what is absolutely astonishing in this story as well is that in France, for example, you have the government which is now prepared to pay up to £60 million to have these implants removed, while in the UK you still had the check.
The thing is, Nabila, I know I interviewed Andrew Lansley about this a couple of weeks ago, and you know, naturally people think, oh, it's all about the money. There we go, the miserly NHS, they want to spend the money. Actually, he said it's not necessarily about that. We've consulted with best clinical advice, and it is that actually invasive surgery to remove these implants might not be a very good idea on the balance of risk. The French take a different view. You know, it's science, not.
But mixed messages for the poor women. You know, in France and the UK, what do you do?
And you will have already 250 women in the UK who have taken legal action to try and do something about it. They have important concerns.
Okay, I know we've got lots more stories to get through. We're going to do that just after this commercial break. Some of the stories we'll be talking about next. Let's give you a taster. The drive to stop council tenants subletting their houses. And is smacking really the reason French children are better behaved? Newspapers, we've got David Akinsanya and Nabila Ramdani with us, talking about smacking, Nabila, where in France it seems to be something which children face on a regular basis in schools. Your mother was a school teacher.
Yes, absolutely. She works in a school, and she says that it's not unusual to see scenes where teachers actually smack children for them to behave. And the argument, the reason given is that they're not getting enough smacking at home. So a school seems to be taking the responsibility of doing that, which I find absolutely shocking.
It's two different things, isn't it? You smacking your own child and someone else doing it. I've been uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, we had a few teachers at my school. We were allowed to have the slipper when I was at school. And there was the odd teacher who were a bit too keen on slippering the kids. So I understand that, but I do think that actually we've lost it in this country when it comes to disciplining children. I do think, particularly for teenage boys, that there has to be this strong male figure who's willing to stand up to a boy and say, you're not going to do that or else. Clip round the ear, that sort of thing.
For people wondering about the law in the UK, it is the case now, after Victoria Climbié 2004, Every Child Matters, there was a big change in the law. You went away from reasonable chastisement, which had been the law for 150 years, to a law which said if you leave anything more than a red mark, you are potentially up before the beak. Now, one of the effects of that, say some, is that parents in the UK are utterly paranoid, and we all know parents who are even reluctant to go to A&E with a child for fear of social services arriving at the door.
Yeah, and what this article overall is saying is that actually French children are much better behaved. If you're on Eurostar, it says here that the kids running up and down the aisles screaming and behaving badly are more likely to be British kids than kids from the continent.
But what's wrong with being a child? That's what children do.
You're French, aren't you? It's your way of doing it. I mean, no, I agree. I do think that, you know, you've got to allow children to be children, but there always has to be that point where you say, you know what, this is the end of the line. And they're talking here about us putting kids on the naughty step just isn't working, rather than giving them a slap.
I think they should, parents should be thinking about alternatives ways of punishing the children without.
I'd like to know your views. It always gets people really worked up, this one, but there is a lot to talk about on that one. News@sky.com for your thoughts, or text us if you prefer 84501. The next pick, let's have a look what we've got next. Who's got the next one?
Yes, it's the story in the Daily Mail about the taxman blitz on super-rich soccer stars, and it's essentially an investigation on Premier League stars and their clubs by the taxman over secret perks enjoyed by the players and indeed their families. So that's a very good story if you want to provide astonishing facts about British society and then football.
This is the home of astonishing facts about British society.
What sort of perks are they talking about?
But they're talking about not only, the fabulous incomes that these players get for essentially kicking a ball, but also the perks.
You'll be in trouble for that.
She will be. But free holiday, luxurious accommodations and other gifts. So that's, if you combine all this, you end up with a nice package. But, financial scandal in football is quite common, actually. The saddest thing, in my opinion, is when you see great clubs shutting down because of abuse of the system.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often, does it?
I'm a Pompey fan, so...
Oh, well, you know what you're talking about then. I think that amounts to low-hanging fruit, doesn't it, for the government to say they're going to crack down on well-paid footballers. David Holmes.
Yeah, and this is a big one. Basically, the coalition government are having a blitz on the 10 billion scandal of houses, council houses being sublet. Now, I know this is a big issue. I've got a friend who lives in a block, and to be honest with you, she doesn't know any of her neighbours, because most of the flats in her block are being sublet.
Is this somewhere posh in London?
No, it's not posh at all. But when you think about the comparison, private rents that people would have to pay to stay in a 3-bedroom apartment, they're huge.
Where are the people who should be living in them?
Exactly. I mean, they're on the waiting list apparently. But the other thing is that this also talks about the amount of people there are that are earning over £100,000 that are still living in council accommodation. I will just mention two of them: Bob Crow and Frank Dobson MP. Both still live in council accommodation, even though we know that their salaries are 6-figure sums.
That does seem unfair, doesn't it?
Yeah,
with
so
people on the waiting list for
that's
council
right. So should we be offering these places where where people have got big salaries to other people? I mean, it's a big issue. And if they're going to save £10 billion, hopefully the government say they're going to put this back into social housing. So hopefully it might make a difference to the waiting list. But it's appalling.
Nabila, just a bit of time for some media navel-gazing.
Yes, the Observer leads with a story about the Labour turning on the BBC over pro-coalition coverage, and it's essentially a serious complaint from the Labour Party to the BBC about a lack of political balance.
Parties do this pretty routinely and perennially.
Yes, and of
all
course the
colours.
BBC is often accused of being too left-wing, but I think what this story really shows is about how it is to be a broadcaster and to reflect, all shades of political opinion. And it's also a story, in my opinion, about the lack of leadership shown by Ed Miliband. And it has to be said, that I think that David Cameron showed impressive skills in terms of leadership in 2011, not only because of the way he handled the EU crisis, but also about his leadership in the war in Libya, for example. So I think people...
You might compliment David Cameron. It would be impossible for us to do that for reasons of balance. David, thanks both very much for your picks.